You're listening to the UnSafe Bible with Pastor Ken Brown.
And now he gives us the executive briefing version, so we can do it in one night. But it's pretty much the same stuff. That's very Jewish too. Usually if they want to get a point across, they'll repeat it. Not quite the same way, but they will repeat it. So this is what he's doing. All the prophets actually hammer the point of not turning to other nations, and they've done it consistently to the point that we even see it showing up in the New Testament. Paul talks about it in 2 Corinthians 6:14 when he says, don't be linked up with unbelievers. We've talked about that too.
Today, Pastor Ken will be exhorting you to depend on the Lord rather than running to the world for comfort and advice. Israel continuously turned to Egypt, which represents the world, for help whenever the enemy attacked them or whenever they experienced hardships. God has repeatedly warned them to stop turning to other nations for help, but they disobeyed and received judgment. You, as a Christian, must also heed this warning because to be friends with the world is to be at enmity with God. Well, let's join Pastor Ken in the book of Isaiah, chapter 31, as he begins his message, Does God Really Intervene?
The question is, does God really intervene today? And a lot of people want to know that. This is a question also that Judah was asking. Does God intervene today, 705 BC? Then they are planning things, but they're not thinking about the Lord. So I said, well, why do we insist on planning over faith instead of planning in faith? There's a difference between the two. You plan and we're going to lean on the Lord for this, or you can plan and say, that's what the nation of Judah was doing. They were planning and not including the Lord in their plans. They were just, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and God, well, no, we're not going to include him. We're going to do this and do that because he doesn't care about what we do over here because we only see him in the temple. Well, guess what? That kind of goes around today too. We hear the same thing. In Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, the word says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he'll make your path straight. That's very, very clear, very, very upfront. Judah knew this, okay? The folks in Jerusalem absolutely knew what that verse is. It was in Proverbs. They had Proverbs. They knew what it said. It's clear. It's unambiguous. We understand it today. Hezekiah's guys understood it in 705 BC. But you wonder, based on what Isaiah's been saying, if the Jews who worked for King Hezekiah had kind of rewritten it, and it said this, trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean entirely on your own understanding, but have a really good plan. In all your ways acknowledge him, but hedge your bets with a really good plan, and he'll make your path straight and your plan clear. That's not biblical, but that's what they were thinking, and unfortunately, we tend to think that way sometimes today as well. In chapter 31, we're going to find out, yes, Isaiah has not dropped the topic about don't go to other nations for help. That's still going on. He talked about that. All the prophets talked about that. He takes all the content that he's just provided us in chapter 30, and we've spent 3 weeks going through, and now he gives us the executive briefing version, so we can do it in one night. But it's pretty much the same stuff. That's very Jewish too. Usually if they want to get a point across, they'll repeat it. Not quite the same way, but they will repeat it. So this is what he's doing. All the prophets actually hammer the point of not turning to other nations, and they've done it consistently to the point that we even see it showing up in the New Testament. Paul talks about it in 2 Corinthians 6:14 when he says, don't be linked up with unbelievers. And we've talked about that too. Now, Isaiah ties the fact that they've gone to Egypt, and he says, because you've gone to Egypt, you've rejected God. He makes them equal to each other. That's a warning for us too. When we turn to the world for answers rather than the Lord, we're rejecting him in favor of the world and the world's answers. And am I the only one who's ever done that? It's something that I'll just take care of it this way. And then things don't go the way that you would hope them to. And he said, well, I prayed about it. No, I didn't pray about it. We've all done that. So here we are in chapter 31, verse 1. Woe to those who go down to Egypt for help and rely on horses and trust in chariots because they are many, and in horsemen because they are very strong. But they do not look to the Holy One of Israel, nor seek the Lord. Now, it's obvious that he is from the south because they're going down to Egypt. We know what that means. They're going south, and they are, actually. But he had warned earlier in chapter 30, don't do this. He had warned earlier in chapter 28, don't do this. He had revealed in chapter 30 the top secret negotiations that were going on in two separate locations in Egypt for everybody to hear. Hezekiah's ambassadors went ahead with a plan anyhow. The agreement has moved forward. Isaiah's warning has been completely ignored. And so now he doubles down and uses a term that no one ever wants to hear a prophet say, and talking about you. He uses the term, woe. Okay, that's not a good thing. This is, by the way, the fourth time in this section since we've started chapter 28 that Isaiah uses this. So where are the woes so far, okay? The first woe was in chapter 28, and there he talked about the drunkards of Ephraim, and Jerusalem was real happy about that until they found out, nope, I'm really talking about Jerusalem. Okay, that didn't work well. The second woe was to Ariel. That's a code word for Jerusalem. It's all about the coming fall, oppression, and then deliverance of Jerusalem when God delivers them, as he's going to a couple of years in the future from when Isaiah is writing at this point, from the Assyrians, and also ultimately at the end of the age. The third woe is in chapter 30, and that one's to the rebellious children. Have you noticed the terms? They're really, really great terms. They're drunkards. I'm going to use a code word so you don't know that I'm talking about you. And now I'm going to call you rebellious children. None of this is good. By the way, he's talking to the rebellious children connected to Egypt, seeking help from the world. Again, it's Jerusalem. That was in chapter 30. So now we come to the fourth woe, and it's directed against those who negotiated the deal and those who were relying on it. Those who went to Egypt. You think they should have not gone to Egypt? I'm kind of picking up on that with all of this. But here's what Isaiah is really talking about. The leadership could rest wholly upon the Lord and his strength and his might. And by doing so, they would confirm their relationship with him as their God, and they are his people. Or they could reject him and go to Egypt and commit idolatry with Egypt, saying, well, I like how Matthew Henry puts this, we're idolizing the Egyptians and we make court with them because happy are the people who have Egyptians for their friends and allies, because they've got modern armies and we don't. They've got lots of people and we don't. So they go to Egypt when they have a problem that comes up. Now, Egypt worships not just one false god, but they have a whole pantheon. And remember back in Exodus, God said, I'm judging them. So why are they back in Egypt talking to a bunch of idol worshipers? Well, they're gone back to the world. Egypt is a type of the world every time it shows up in the Bible. And when they turn up going to Egypt, they're going back to the world for answers. So they think that it's better to talk to people who don't know anything about the God of the universe to find out how to protect themselves here on this planet, rather than talking to the God of the universe who says, hey, I'm here, I'm ready to talk to you. This is not going to be the last time, nor is it the first, that God's people will enter into a questionable alliance with the world. By the way, we do this all the time. We enter into business deals. We have some folks who decide that they're going to do missionary dating, and they wind up getting married to unbelievers, and they find out that missionary dating doesn't work, and neither does missionary marriage. Having grown up in a home with a believer and an unbeliever, it causes all kinds of trouble. In the last days, Israel's going to make another questionable deal. They're going to cut a deal with somebody called the Beast. The Beast won't be known as the Beast at that point. It's just going to be somebody who said, I'll protect you for 7 years. I'll make sure that Israel's safe. I'll take care of everything you need and keep you safe. As it says in Daniel chapter 9, he'll make a strong covenant, strong contract, strong agreement with many for 1 week. And for half of the week, he'll put an end for one week and one half. So for 3.5 years, everything's fine. But after the end of 3.5 years, it says he'll put an end to sacrifice and offering, and on the wing of abomination shall come one who makes desolate until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. That's a technical term for he will go into the temple where the Holy of Holies is, which means the temple has to be rebuilt, and he's going to desolate or cause the worship in the temple to end, and he's actually going to say, I'm God, worship me. Antiochus Epiphanes, who did the same thing back around 400 AD, he actually put up an altar to Jupiter and sacrificed pigs in the Holy of Holies. So, I mean, this has been done once before as a picture to be able to look forward to what's going on here. The signing of the deal will mark the beginning of the tribulation. So when that deal's signed, the 7-year clock starts. And when he breaks the deal at the middle of it, that begins what's called the Great Tribulation. We covered that when we went through the book of Revelation. So what is it that's the driving factor behind seeking help from Egypt? So you go back to verse 1 and says, woe to those who go down to Egypt for help and rely on horses. They are relying on horses and chariots. That's the driving deal here. Now, in the 21st century, we sit there and we go, okay, this is people who are relying on horses and chariots. We struggle with that because we have modern weaponry. But in 705 BC, horses and chariots were considered cutting-edge military technology. If you had lots of horses and lots of chariots, it would be the same as you've got lots of tanks and you've got delivery systems that you can also attack the enemy from a far distance and move very, very quickly. So you've got helicopters, you've got tanks, is what you would call it today. Well, that's what they have. They have high-tech technology. They have horses and chariots. But there's a problem about horses and chariots and what they're doing. And the problem is in Deuteronomy 17, Yahweh said, don't do it. Don't ever do it. Period. In verse 16 of Deuteronomy 17, only talking about the king of Israel, he must not acquire many horses for himself or cause the people to return to Egypt in order to acquire many horses, since the Lord has said you'll never return that way again. So they're not supposed to go to Egypt. They're not supposed to negotiate with Egypt. They're not supposed to get horses and chariots from Egypt. And where are they? They're in Egypt. Moses actually laid out for them in Deuteronomy 20, here's how you do warfare. And as you study 1st and 2nd Kings, you find that there are some guys who did this. One of them's name is Jehoshaphat. Moses said, if you go into battle against your enemies and you see cavalry and riders and a people greater than you, you shall not be afraid of them, for the Lord your God is with you, who made you go up from the land of Egypt. It will be when you draw near for battle and approaching, the priest will speak to the people and he'll say to them, hear, O Israel, go today in the battle against your enemies. Let not your heart be faint. Do not be frightened or broken to pieces or turn from their face. The Lord your God is proceeding with you to fight with you and against your enemies to preserve you. And you see in the 1st and 2nd Kings, that happens over and over and over again when they rely on the Lord, until it reaches a point when they've rebelled and the Babylonian army surrounds Jerusalem and God's not protecting them anymore because they've fallen too far into sin. What God's telling them is your destiny as a country does not rely upon horses, or if we were to look at it today, your destiny does not rely upon missiles and bombers and modern weapons systems. A lot of people today think that if I've got special weapons of mass destruction, that I can do anything and I don't have to be dependent upon God. And as you study the scriptures, Iran, who is going to be one of those nations, is going to think they've got everything together. But we see in Ezekiel chapter 38 that they're going to have a problem with that, and God's the one who's going to judge them. It's not to say that having weapons and faith in God are wrong in a fallen world. It just means that if all you're relying on is the weaponry, then you got a problem because you're not relying on the Lord. He's saying, don't look to Egypt for help. Don't rely on their technological superiority or the fact that they have numerically superior forces. Don't rely on the people who have been trained to use these high-tech tools known as horses and chariots, but have faith in the Lord instead and His ability to protect you. That's what they should be doing. But instead, they've rejected God and they've turned to Egypt. And God says to them, that's idolatry. You're practicing idolatry by doing that. You're now idolizing the Egyptians and their military over what's going on here. Assyria is coming. We know that. The scriptures tell us that. Isaiah says they are coming. But who does Judah trust? Do they trust Yahweh or do they trust Egypt? Well, it looks like at this point they trust Egypt, right? Now, for us, you have to look at it the same way. You kind of fill in the blank. I'll look at it this way. The new year is coming. It is. But who do we trust? Do we trust the Lord to take care of us? Or are we hedging our bets and trying to figure out how to make sure that we've got everything taken care of, especially with the pandemic and the questionable election that people are still dealing with and not knowing about what the economy is going to do, which I prefer to trust in the Lord. That's what we're supposed to do. Verse 2, yet He, speaking of the Lord, also is wise and will bring disaster and does not retract His words, but will arise against the house of evildoers and against the help of the workers of iniquity. So no matter what happens, when we ignore the truth about who God is and why we should rely on Him, have you ever noticed that He's still also wise? You know, we think we've got the answer because we've read a new book that just came out, or we've listened to the right radio program, 100 different ways to spend your money before you get to be 30, or whatever it is. And we try it out and we find out, boy, that was really a bad decision. And God's still also wise. He's always, He said, do it this way. And He's still saying, do it this way. He never changes, by the way. Have you picked up on that too? God says, don't be unequally yoked with unbelievers. And I've seen people try it out in business. I've seen them try it out in relationships. I've seen them try it out in all these different worlds that they deal with on a day-to-day basis. And at the end of the day, they come back and say, that's a good idea. I probably shouldn't be unequally yoked with unbelievers in this business relationship, in this business deal or whatever. Now, God does work, but at the same time, why do you want to align yourselves and enter into a business deal with someone who's not a believer? Or into a relationship with someone who's not a believer? Their goals are going to be very different than your goals. Those from Judah have run off to Egypt, and God's just saying they're foolish. Even though what they do is foolish, Yahweh is still wise. Those who are foolish, disaster is waiting for them. And this upcoming disaster is actually going to exhibit the wisdom of God and expose the foolishness of all those who went off to Egypt to cut a deal. They go to Egypt, they say, we need you to protect us. Here's a whole bunch of gold. Take care of us. Make sure you show up when the enemy shows up. We'll give you a call. We'll have you go down there and have you come back up. And they don't. Because as they found out, ambassadors and politicians routinely misspeak. The folks from Judah found that out. They found out they were being played by Egypt. And have you noticed that hasn't stopped? Politicians and ambassadors still misspeak today, and so do business people. Now, misspeak is a technical term for a very short word, lie. Okay? That's what they're actually doing. They're lying to us. God does not lie. He does not misspeak. When He says something, He means it. His wisdom is reflected that whatever He says, whenever He said it, is always the same. He never changes His mind. Now we see what's called an anthropomorphism in the scripture where it says God repented of His desire and He sends a flood to destroy. That's so that we can understand Him more, because it's tough for us to understand a God who knows everything and knows it all in advance. And well, then why did you make man to begin with if you know? Well, that's why He puts that in there. But when He says, don't go to Egypt, and He says it multiple times in Deuteronomy and Exodus and other places, He has not changed His mind. When God says, this is a sin, well, it's been 3,000 years. Has God changed his mind about that? Maybe it's not as bad a sin today as it was 3,000 years ago. Does God still mean the same thing that he did 3,000 years? Yeah, he hasn't changed his mind. God still says it is sin. He has never changed his mind about that. But we think he has, and we think he's winked. I mean, Jesus said in Matthew chapter 5, do not think that I came to destroy the law or the prophets. I didn't come to destroy them, but to fulfill them, because I tell all of you with certainty that until heaven and earth disappear, not one letter or one stroke of a letter will disappear from the law until everything has been accomplished. Whatever God says he's going to do, or whatever he said in the past about this is a way to live wisely, he hasn't changed it. Numbers 23:19 kind of points that out. God is not a man that he should lie, nor a son of man that he should repent. Has he said, and will he not do it? Or has he spoken, and will he not make it good? But I noticed that he says, God is not a man that he should lie. What that implies is that men lie. Well, how often do men lie? Certain individuals who make themselves rulers over others in the business world or in the political world lie all the time, but that's a different issue. So no matter how much wisdom we attribute to political and business leaders, and they write books and they tell you how to make this deal or how to do this or how to best negotiate these kinds of agreements, or here's how I was successful in generating a $1 billion profit. They're not wise. God truly is wise. I always get a kick out of reading books written by political figures because they all tell you how great they are, and it's just kind of like, yeah, you know, they've started believing their own paper clippings that they keep in their binder at home. They start to believe those. God tells us not to. He tells us not to do that. When Judah goes to seek answers that are not from the Lord, what they wind up getting is foolishness. When we try to seek answers that are not from the Lord, what are we getting? Foolishness. The same thing, not a lot different. The Lord does not take back. He is unchangeably what he's revealed himself to be, and he'll never be untrue to his promises or his standards, ever. So is God the foe of the wicked? Always. It never changes. Is God always going to be the foe of the wrongdoer? Always. It never changes. Is God going to protect his people? Always. It never changes. He always will. When he says that he loves us because we love him, does that change? Nope, never does. He loves us. He abides by what he has spoken. And this is a characteristic of wisdom. Have you ever talked to somebody who says, I'm going to do this for you because this is the situation right now, and I can come over and help you fix that fence. But something happens during the week, and all of a sudden they've got to get their car repaired, and they don't show up to help you work on the fence, and you're struggling trying to put things back together when you were relying on having another set of hands there. Has that ever happened where situations change? Yeah, it happens all the time. But God is not like that. God never changes his mind, never retracts his words. If he promises to do something, he will do it. Always. Here's the problem, though, for Judah. They have the God of the universe that they could talk to. He invites them to do that. By the way, he also invites us to do the same.
You've been listening to a message from Isaiah on the UnSafe Bible. Pastor Ken has been diving deep into this major prophet to help us all understand how to apply these messages to our lives today. Well, as we see here in Isaiah, the whole scope and sequence of the life of Jesus, from the announcement of his birth to the second coming, the time he'll return for his people, for all those redeemed by his blood. This book is like a person crying out into a busy street, desperately needing to be heard. God is our one true salvation. Isaiah encourages his readers to trust and believe in God because it's God who dispels the darkness that comes from a sin-filled world. If you have questions about today's message, or you just want to hear more, don't hesitate to contact us. You can get in touch with us by going to the unsafebible.com. Once there, use the Connect tab and click on Connect Card. Just fill out the form and we'll reach out to you. Remember to listen to other teachings from Pastor Ken. Just look under the Media tab at the unsafebible.com. If you found this ministry to be a blessing to you as you've been listening, you can show us your support for the UnSafe Bible ministry by checking out the Give tab. No gift is too big or too small, and will help us continue to reach the lost with God's Word. We're based out of Jupiter, Florida, and want to invite you to join us in person for the next service. All the information you need to come is found at theunsafebible.com. Until then, we want to thank you for joining us right here on the UnSafe Bible.